Hey, welcome back. In today's tutorial, I'll show you how to take an orchestral drum sample, and with some creative processing, I will show you how I design monstrous demonic voice effects. These are the dark, aggressive creature sounds that you hear in movies, video games, and TV. We'll walk through the process step by step so you can build your own cinematic monstrous voice from scratch. But heads up, at the very beginning, it might not sound like the full-blown monstrous voice we're aiming for. You just have to trust the process, follow the steps, and we'll get there. Let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so first I had to choose a solid drum sample to work with. And for this, I chose one of my favorite trade or percussion libraries, which is Serum by Keep Forest, which looks like this. Let me play a little something so you can hear what it sounds like. Now, let's take a quick listen to the one that I picked for this tutorial. So next what I did was I took that drum sample to design a really aggressive synth type lead using the latest Serum 2. Let's go ahead and open up Serum and let's get started with our sound design. Now what I did next was I dragged and dropped that drum sample after bouncing it onto oscillator A in Serum, right where it says FFT258. So if you take your drum sample and hover it over oscillator A, it's right here, FFT258, and then you just drag and drop it right in there. Then we want to go into our wavetable editor, which in order to do that, you want to click on this pencil icon and it takes us right into our wavetable editor. Next, what you want to do is you want to go to morph and select spectral fundamental phase. This alters the wavetable shape without changing its harmonics. Then you want to go into where it says all and you want to select normalize each gain separately. Then you want to go back in there again and remove DC offset. Real quick, I want to mention that if you are interested in what these options do, I have another video called how to create Brahms in Serum. In that video, I go in depth on what each of these options mean and what they do to the sample. All right, now that we're done here in our wavetable editor, let's go ahead and exit and let's go back to our oscillator A. Next, what I did was I took LFO1 with the default shape and I dragged and dropped it into oscillator A's wavetable knob, which is right here. And then I went right up here where it says octave and I lowered the octave to -2 to give it a deeper growl. Then I went back to LFO1 and I set the bar rate to 2. One important step you want to make sure is you want to go back here back to oscillator A, and under this tab you want to make sure you select filter. By choosing that option, it sends the wavetable to this filter right over here. And then for filter 1, I went into the menu section, selected normal, and then selected MG low 12. And another important step, I also activated the sub oscillator and left the octave at 0. Next, I created a unique shape for LFO2. So on Mac, if you hold down Shift and left click on the grid, you can design some really interesting shapes. I love experimenting with LFO shapes in Serum because they give you so many cool and interesting characteristics. Then what I did was I set LFO2's rate bar to 2 bars, just like I did with LFO1. Also, another important thing I do want to mention is that you want to make sure that all your LFOs are set to envelope mode, which is right here. By selecting envelope 2, this lets the wavetable sample play as opposed to choosing retrigger where it'll just keep looping over and over again. Then I took LFO3, I used the default shape, but I added a small slight upward curve and then I set its rate to 2 bars as well. Then what I did was I took LFO3 and dragged and dropped it onto the cutoff knob for filter 1. Next what I did was I headed over to the effects tab and I started stacking some effects. I added some distortion for some grit, some hyper dimension for some width, and reverb using the Hall setting, and I just lowered the mix slightly. And finally, I added a filter for some tone shaping. One of the cool tricks that I like to do a lot when I'm doing sound design is taking an LFO shape and dragging and dropping it onto the filter cutoff knob. This adds dynamic motion and some cool variations to the growls or whatever the effect you're trying to achieve. Now let's go back to our oscillators, and after tweaking the wavetable knob a bit, as well as the cutoff knob in our filter section, I held down the D and the B flat notes and recorded the sound. Let's go ahead and take a listen and see what we got with all this processing and effects added to our wavetable. Next, I layered the Serum sound with the original drum sample from earlier that we used from Serum. But then I took one extra step and I took a plugin called Dehumanizer and I threw it on the drum sample to give it an animalistic growl so that the Serum sound and the growl were more glued together. Then I added some decapitator for some saturation and brightness. I added some EQ to roll off the low end and carve out some of the muddiness around 300 to 500 hertz. And then for the other sample with the growl and the Dehumanizer baked into it, I added some decapitator using the E T-style, pushed up the tone a bit for some brightness with a little bit of drive. I brought out my EQ, carved some of that low end out, and then some of that 4K harshness. And then I added some good old OTT with the upward compression at 143% and the downward compression at 22%. And again, my def at around 38%. Then I took both of these samples and I used what's called in Logic the flex option, and I time stretched them, shortened them up a little bit, and I reversed them. And I really love the result of how it came out. Let's take a quick listen. And then I took those previous samples we just heard and I did more post-processing. I time stretched them, I reversed some of them just to create new tonal variations. I added more OTT for more upwards and downwards compression, some more EQ to remove some of that low end and some of that muddiness, 4K harshness. And I also added some IM pusher to push up some of that body, and as well as some black hole to give us some massive reverb. And finally, to some of these samples, I added dehumanizer. As I mentioned earlier, I used the same one to give it that animalistic growl to it. It's an incredible plugin. It transforms any sound into growling beasts, creatures, aliens, and other really strange textures. I highly recommend you check it out. So let's go ahead and listen to these 3 layers separately that I created using the samples from before. Let's go ahead and take a listen. And then finally, I processed all of the 3 variations we just heard and added more post-processing to create more variations. I used Guitar Rig for extra texture, extra characteristics, EQ to clean up again some unwanted frequencies, another IM pusher by Infected Mushroom to bring back some of that low end and some more power. And then I used a glue compressor to make all of these 3 samples sound cohesive. And as you can see this time, I stacked them all on top of each other. I just wanted to combine all these variations into one to make it one big monstrous sound. Let's listen to all of them together to hear the final result. That was pretty cool. I really like that one. And as you can see, for the plugins for some of these, I bypassed the black hole on this one because this one was already processed with some black hole. For this sample, some more EQ, I used Guitar Rig. Ended up using one of the presets and just doing some few adjustments. For this sample right here, I time stretched it and I dropped it minus 12 octaves, added more black hole, another IM pusher, and some more EQ to carve out some of those unwanted frequencies. And then for this sample right here, I time stretched it a bit, added some decapitator, this time using the T-style, brought up the brightness a bit, and just left the drive alone. And then I brought out an EQ just to remove some of that unwanted muddiness that I was hearing. And then just for the summing stack, I just added another OTT. I had the downwards compression 30%, upwards at 100%. Def this time I brought it up to 45. And then just an adaptive limiter, pushed up the gain, turned on DC offset, and turned on true peak detection with an out ceiling of minus 0.1. And then for the stereo chain, I just cut some low side. I used a soft clipper to tame those peaks. And then another adaptive limiter. I didn't push up the gain this time because I already had enough because of all the layers combined. Again, turned on, removed DC offset, turned on true peak detection, and I kept my out ceiling at minus 0.1. And there you have it. That's how you can create your own demonic, monstrous voices using nothing more than Serum, a drum sample, and a few plugins with some creative processing. And of course, this is just one of the many ways that I like to create all different kinds of monstrous sounds. I guess that's what makes it fun for me, knowing the fact that I can learn just by experimenting and messing around with all kinds of post-processing, and most importantly, learning new techniques from those who know way more than I do. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And also drop a comment below. Let me know what kind of sound design tutorial you'd like me to do next. Alright, I'll see y'all on the next one.